ground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bomber. So we have a lot of agreement with Iran, and I think something's going to happen very positive.
Now, Trump has reiterated that claim, and he's added that no money will be changing hands. However, reports citing Iranian sources say that gaps remain to be resolved between the two sides. The reports say that the U.S. has proposed a 20-year suspension of all Iranian nuclear activity during last weekend's talks. But Tehran has suggested a halt of 3 to 5 years only. Iran has also demanded that the international sanctions on it be lifted. In fact, Iran is also yet to react on Donald Trump's continuation of the American blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, despite it having declared open. And the reason Iran gave for reopening the strait was the ceasefire in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. However, remember just hours ago, Israel's defense minister said that its operations in Lebanon were not complete.
We are inside Lebanon in the midst of a war against Hezbollah, with a frozen situation and a 10-day ceasefire. The IDF holds and continues to hold all the locations it has cleared and captured. The ground maneuver into Lebanon and the strikes on Hezbollah throughout Lebanon have achieved many gains, but they are still not complete.
However, Trump has issued a stern rebuke to Israel. He put up a post saying that Israel has been prohibited from bombing Lebanon. He's also added that enough is enough. We'll, of course, now have to wait and see if Israel complies, and if it does, for how long. The Iran-US ceasefire is scheduled to end on the 22nd of April. The Israel-Lebanon ceasefire is in place for just 10 days. If either is allowed to expire without a broader deal in place, remember, the Strait of Hormuz may be blocked once again. All right, let me introduce my guests on the show. I'm joined by Mr. Heino Kling, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia. Mr. Kling, thanks very much for sparing the time. I want to start by asking you, this has been a big development, the Strait of Hormuz being reopened by Iran on the route that it says that has been marked by its own authorities. But how do you see this moving forward, really? You know, because there are some friction points, and major ones at that. Case in point is the nuclear enrichment. 20 years versus 3 to 5 years is what we're looking at.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think you have pointed out the two major issues in the negotiation. One is the Strait of Hormuz and its role as an international waterway not controlled by Iran. And two, the future of Iran's nuclear program, and specifically the future of the enriched uranium that appears to be buried underground. These are the major points of contention in the bilateral relationship between the United States and Iran. I think we have some room for guarded optimism because it appears as if the ceasefire is going to be extended. I think we've also seen progress being made between Lebanon and Israel based on negotiations that the United States government has shepherded forward. So I am hopeful that progress will continue to be made.
You know, it's interesting, Mr. Kling, that the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire, in that Lebanon authorities have already said that there have been violations. And, you know, this, of course, goes on to say how vulnerable and how fragile this entire ceasefire has been, whether it's the America-Iran ceasefire or the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire. But, you know, there are, of course, several reports that suggest that there are 60 days of negotiations that will take place till there is a deal that is signed between America and Iran. Would 60 days be enough to resolve these issues that we are talking about?
We shall see. I think that, again, there's hope for some optimism. Ceasefires, by their very nature, can be very, very fragile, as you pointed out, particularly with respect to Lebanon and Israel, because remember you have a third party, Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization that has been funded, trained, and equipped by Iran, and has been one of their most deadly proxy forces in the region. I'm sure that Hezbollah will continue to play a spoiler role I think 60 days is a good starting point. What will remain to be seen, because as you've accurately reported, the United States position is that the blockade on Iranian ports is still in effect, and Iran's economy, as vulnerable as it has been, and in the feeble state that it has been, is going to be put under even more pressure because, as has been widely observed, they only have a capacity to store fuel for about 2 weeks, and then they're going to end up having to completely shut down all their oil production, which is the only lifeline that they have for any type of economic income for their already impoverished people.
So we'll have to wait and see how this moves forward. Of course, weekend is when several reports are saying that the second round of talks will take place. What happens in them and how this proceeds will decide, how this entire war, this conflict ends, and hopefully it will end. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Heino Kling, for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
All right, with that, let's tell you how the US President Donald Trump has hit out at Fox News host as she's revealed his negative poll numbers in a televised segment. In a scathing critique, Donald Trump took to Truth Social, hurling slurs against Fox News host Jessica Tarlov. In fact, in his post, he described her as one of the least attractive and talented people on all of television, citing that Jessica's voice is grating and terrible. Now, Tarlov, who's a former strategist and pollster for the Democratic Party, bashed Donald Trump's popularity during a roundtable discussion with her co-hosts. In her statement, Jessica Tarlov said that the U.S. president has a 35% approval rating in most polls, also adding that Americans did not want tariffs, a war with Iran, and also the ballroom at the White House, which has been reconstructed. A recent YouGov poll found that just 38% of Americans approve of the way Trump is handling his job as president, while 56% disapprove. According to the poll, most Americans don't back the war that Trump and Israel have waged against Iran. Only 35% approve of how Trump is handling Iran, while 57% disapprove of the current situation. Now, President Trump's recent rift with Pope Leo XIV, where in a lengthy social media post, the president had called the head of the Catholic Church as too liberal and weak on crime, is also drawing backlash from the Catholic cohort. In the 2024 presidential elections, remember, the Pew Research Center analyzed that racial background played a significant role, with 62% of white Catholics voting for Donald Trump and 37% for Kamala Harris, while 41% of the Hispanic Catholics voted Trump and 58% voted for Harris. Let me quickly go across to Susan Tehrani, our colleague joining us from New York. Susan, the fact that there has been a lot of criticism coming Jessica Tarlov's way from Donald Trump is reflective of also how his deteriorating polling numbers have started to affect him, specifically, of course, the coming right ahead of the midterm elections in November this year.
Yeah, absolutely. These two stories converge in more than one way, as you mentioned. On the one hand, he has this attack on a personality that's really saying his poll numbers, and she's saying these poll numbers on a network like Fox, where most Republicans watch. And the show that she's on, is extremely popular in America among Democrats and Republicans. So that's why perhaps he pinpointed that and took issue with that, because there is really sort of a disconnect between President Trump's poll numbers and the narrative that the White House is putting out, especially when it comes to the war in Iran. Historically, foreign policy is a strong bragging point for U.S. presidents. It's not a point where voters really have strong opinions on. But when it comes to the issue of the Iran war and the tariffs, it appears that the American people are not on the same page as the White House is. And it just shows how sensitive the White House is to these poll numbers. But I think even those that support the president believe that it is important for the president and his administration and his White House to look beyond the people that are giving him all the good news about the good things that he's doing, and he needs to understand that there is this disconnect in trying to prevent perhaps an all-out wipeout in the elections, the midterms.
All right, Susan, thanks very much. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us with the latest at the moment. All right, with that, let's shift our focus to India now. The constitutional amendment over the women's reservation in the parliament and state assemblies and the bill to establish a delimitation mechanism have been defeated in the Lok Sabha, that's the lower house of the parliament. The government has failed to get a two-thirds majority during the vote on the amendment during the ongoing special session of the parliament. The Lok Sabha voted on the constitutional amendment. It was about implementing women's reservation in elected bodies such as the parliament and state assemblies. However, over 200 MPs voted against the amendment, causing it to fail. The government needed a two-thirds majority to pass the constitutional amendment. The opposition says that they voted against it because it was linked to a delimitation bill. Leader of the opposition in Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, said this after the bill was defeated. Take a listen.
कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पर अटैक था और संविधान पर आक्रमण था और इसको हमने हरा दिया है, तो अच्छी बात है.
Now, opposition parties were in uproar over these bills being introduced together. Delimitation, remember, is a controversial subject, especially for southern states. They fear that the proportion of their representation in the parliament will be reduced if delimitation occurs. Constitutional amendments require a two-thirds majority in both Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha to pass. Now, the Bharatiya Janata Party-led National Democratic Alliance, or the NDA, did not have the required numbers in the Lok Sabha. Ahead of the voting on the bills, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made an appeal to parliamentarians to allow them to pass these bills.
चाहे दक्षिण हो, उत्तर हो, पूर्व हो, पश्चिम हो, छोटे राज्य हो, बड़े राज्य हो, मैं आज एक जिम्मेवारी से कहना चाहता हूं कि निर्णय प्रक्रिया किसी के साथ भी भेदभाव नहीं करेगी.
However, the Government of India has issued a Gazette notification stating that the 2023 Women's Reservation Bill has come into force.
So we don't get that.
Well, the Supreme Court of India has issued a directive which will provide relief to some people excluded from the West Bengal election rolls due to the special intensive revision process that was carried out. West Bengal, remember, goes to polls in two phases on the 23rd and 29th of April. Voter rolls for the first phase of the election were frozen on the 9th of April. But the Supreme Court noted that more than 34 lakh or 3.4 million appeals have been filed before the appellate tribunals. And this means people are still appealing their right to vote, and the tribunals are adjudicating their claims even now after the freeze. The Supreme Court bench, comprising Chief Justice Suryakant and Justice Joymala Bagchi, provided relief to people whose appeals against exclusion are allowed before 21st and 22nd of April. The bench directed the Election Commission to issue supplementary revised electoral rolls for the people included by the appellate tribunals by those dates. And our correspondent Dharamjot Kaur has sent us this report from Kolkata. Take a look.
It's a high-octane election season here in West Bengal. But beyond election issues, this particular polling season is already mired in controversy after the Election Commission removed over 9.1 million voters from the state's voter list. Now it's a race against time for over 3.4 million people who have filed an appeal with the appellate tribunal to ensure that they're granted voting rights for the assembly election. Whether or not that happens is going to be something to watch out for. The Supreme Court has passed an order this week where it grants time to the voters and the appellate tribunal till 21st for the first phase and 27th for the second phase. Now, in this time, whoever gets their appeal listened to and get a judgment on will be able to vote. But whether or not that happens is the big question. beyond all the economic issues, issues of identity and other battles that are taking place in West Bengal, the SAR remains the key issue that has overshadowed everything else. Because at stake are millions of votes for all the political parties, especially for the TMC that is looking to maintain its stronghold in West Bengal. Whether or not that happens, we'll find out once counting takes place on May the 4th. With video journalist Joy from Kolkata, this is Dharmjot Kaur for WION World is One.
Well, shifting our focus now, Myanmar's junta chief turned president Min Aung Hlaing has approved amnesty for more than 4,300 prisoners, and former state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has had her sentence reduced, albeit marginally. This is, remember, the third such amnesty move approved in the last 6 months. The amnesty coincides with the festival of Thing Yan, which is Myanmar's New Year. Among the prisoners freed is Win Myint, the democratically elected president who the junta had deposed in the 2021 coup. Win Myint served as the president between 2018 and 21. Myanmar announced that it has released a total of 4,335 prisoners. It says 179 of them are foreign nationals who will be deported. Myanmar also says that an unspecified number of death sentences have been commuted to life imprisonment. Some life sentences have been reduced to 40 years in prison, and an unspecified number of prisoners have had their terms reduced by 1/6. Human rights groups say that over 30,000 people had been detained since the coup, and about 8,600 were reportedly freed in November last, and another 6,000 this January. Among those who have had their prison sentences reduced by 1/6 is former state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. She was the de facto leader of Myanmar before the 2021 coup. She was, remember, arrested during the military takeover, and the junta charged her with a number of offences. The 80-year-old leader has been in prison ever since. She was given a combined sentence of 27 years. Now, her lawyer says that her term has been reduced by 1/6. Veteran leader Denis Sassou Nguesso has been sworn in for a fresh 5-year term as the Republic of Congo's president, extending his grip on power to more than 4 decades in the Central African nation. The inauguration ceremony took place at a packed stadium in Kintele near the capital, Brazzaville, following his decisive victory in the March 2026 election, where he secured around 94 to 95% of the vote against a largely weak and fragmented opposition. In his inaugural speech, he said that he would not betray the people who mobilized to honor him and reaffirm their support, while outlining plans focused on economic diversification, infrastructure, and youth employment.
Revitalize the national economy, prioritize agriculture in the broadest sense and industry, create jobs for as many people as possible, and continue to develop basic infrastructure and promote development.
Now, Sassou, who first came to power back in 1979 and returned after a civil war in 1997, is now among Africa's longest-serving leaders. His continued rule has been enabled in part by a 2015 constitutional change that removed presidential term and age limits. Meanwhile, residents pointed to persistent shortages of clean drinking water, unreliable infrastructure, and lack of job opportunities as the most pressing challenges facing the country. Despite its oil wealth, the nation continues to struggle with high unemployment and economic inequality, leaving large sections of the population without access to essential services.
I think that the priorities for this new mandate should first and foremost be water and electricity. These are the things that are causing serious shortages for Congolese people today. In third place would be unemployment. I believe these are 3 major challenges that the president must first focus on tackling, and he should set up a unit to provide us with water and electricity, and especially help young people find employment.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing calls to resign over his appointment of Peter Mandelson as his US envoy. The renewed calls, remember, come after the government confirmed that Peter Mandelson, who was fired for his links with Jeffrey Epstein, failed his security vetting, but Foreign Ministry officials reportedly overruled the advice. According to a Guardian investigation, the failed security check came after Mandelson's appointment had been announced. Mandelson was initially denied clearance in late January 2025 after a developed vetting process, a highly confidential background check by security officials. The report ramps up pressure on UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer over his appointment of Mandelson, who is under police investigation for allegedly leaking government documents to the late sex offender Epstein. Starmer has apologized for the appointment while also defending his actions, accusing Mandelson of misleading officials and promising to release the documents on his appointment details. The UK government claims that the Prime Minister was unaware of Mandelson's failed security vetting for the role until earlier this week. Meanwhile, Britain's top foreign ministry official, Ollie Robbins, has been forced out of his post after Starmer and the Foreign Minister, Yvette Cooper, lost confidence in him. Robbins was the Foreign Office's most senior official in late January last year when the decision was made, paving the way for Mandelson to become the US ambassador. All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION.
जिंदगी के सफर में गुजर जाते हैं जो मकाम.
The voice of versatility and the queen of playback. As India mourns the loss of Asha Bhosle, we celebrate her musical legacy that lives on. A melody of a lifetime. On WION at these times.
In this rapidly changing world, is your health keeping pace? Best practices and breakthroughs busting the hype with real insights. The timeless power of yoga and ancient healing. Good food, good mood. Small steps, big impact. Your health matters. Only on WION World is One. Because nothing matters more.
What is a classic? A motorcycle you've ridden all your life? Or its modern cousin with a retro vibe? Why are women on bikes so stereotyped? A girl can love her art, like to dance, and take her bike out for a ride. Now EVs are taking the world by storm. But hybrids still tread the middle path. It's all about following your bliss on this episode of WION Drive, coming up at these times.
Mind your P's and Q's. Chatbots aren't human, so what? Be polite to Claude. Kind to Gemini. Don't trust AI summaries, face down a T-Rex in virtual reality. If life is a marathon, then robots are making a run for it. Catch all of these stories and more on this episode of Tech It Out at these times.
WION, India's global